Switzerland, lowest crime rate in Western Europe, the most stable currency on the planet, the country everyone points to when they want to say, see, a society can work. It also used to auction off children, like furniture, for over 100 years. The last one closed in 1981. That's not ancient history. That's your uncle was probably alive for this history. This is one of the kids who went through it. They called it Verdingkinder, contract children. Very official sounding name for what was basically a clearance sale. Here's how it worked. A kid becomes inconvenient, orphan, unmarried mother's son, family the town didn't approve of. Doesn't matter the reason. The local council just needs the kid off the books. So they hold an auction. Not for who'd take best care of the child, for whoever would take the kid off their hands for the least money. Cheapest bidder wins. Like a kid is a contract you're trying to get rid of. Between 1920 and 1970, over 100,000 children went through this. In 1930 alone, around 35,000 were under contract at the same time. In Bern, 1 in 5 farm workers under 15 was one of these kids. And this wasn't some wartime panic policy. This was just Tuesday. Switzerland's normal, peacetime way of dealing with poor kids, running quietly underneath the cleanest, richest country in Europe. In 2008, a retired school teacher published a book, Roland Begert, PhD in economics, 30 years teaching at one of Bern's most respected schools. He wasn't writing someone else's story. He was writing his own file. Begert grew up in a Catholic children's home after his mother gave him up. At 12, the authorities sent him to a small farm in the Bernese Zeeland, not to visit, to work. When basic schooling ended, he wasn't given a choice of trade. He was assigned one, an apprenticeship in a foundry, the kind of job nobody picks for themselves. Years of it in Winterthur, shoveling and pouring metal at furnace heat, while a guardian he barely knew kept writing letters behind his back, warning the authorities the boy was difficult to raise and needed to be kept in iron hands. He didn't find out about those letters until decades later in the state archive. The inspectors did exist. On paper, there was oversight. In practice, inspectors talked to the foster parents, almost never to the children. A family that had its act together would show the inspector the real children's bedroom, warm, clean, and never the shed where the contract child actually slept. There's a photograph from the period, a welfare inspector checking a young girl's teeth, the same way you'd check a horse before buying it. Survivor Ursula Biondi, one of the few who later spoke publicly, remembered the same pattern other survivors described: eating standing up, facing away from the table, while the family's own children sat and ate properly. One survivor was told flatly, "You eat too much, you're not giving a good return." 4 words. That's the entire system right there. A good return. By his early 20s, Begert was a foundry worker in Winterthur, and by his own account, drinking heavily. Not occasionally, repeatedly. The kind of drinking that swallows years. Then his appendix burst. 3 weeks in a hospital bed. He described that hospital stay later with one word: beautiful. A warm bed, regular meals, nurses who were kind to him for no reason at all. By his own telling, it was the first time as an adult that anyone had simply taken care of him without expecting work in return. He left the foundry. Years as a traveling laborer followed. Then, at 31, an age most people are settled into a career, Begert went back to night school, finished his diploma, and walked into the University of Bern to study economics and law. He finished with a doctorate. Then he spent the next 30 years teaching in the same country that once filed him as unfit to be educated at all. Begert's book cracked something open. Switzerland had spent decades just not talking about this. Not denying it, just quietly skipping the subject, the way you don't bring up that thing at family dinner. It took until 2013 for the Swiss government to formally apologize. The Minister of Justice stood at a national ceremony and said, on the record, that she was sorry, sincerely, for what had been done. 3 years later, Parliament approved compensation, 25,000 francs per survivor. For some, that's the number Switzerland decided a stolen childhood was worth. For others, it wasn't close, and they said so loudly. By then, an estimated 10,000 former Verdingkinder were still alive to hear it. A lot of them never even applied. Some couldn't navigate the paperwork. Many had been pulled out of school too early to read it comfortably. Others just didn't trust the same authorities, asking nicely, decades later, to make it right. Switzerland didn't hide this behind walls or borders. It ran this in plain sight for over 150 years, inside one of the most functional democracies on Earth. Nobody had to be a villain for it to work. They just had to agree, quietly, that some children were cheaper to place than to protect. Roland Begert spent 30 years correcting essays in a classroom in the same city that once decided he wasn't worth teaching. He's one of maybe 10,000 who are still alive. Most of them have never once been asked what happened to them. Begert just happened to write it down first.